What it then became was an invitation to dance, and the Europeans rushed from the G20 to Geneva.
This is like the third or fourth time they've had to do this?
We've seen this. And now we're back at something that I can tell you, Vladimir Putin will not accept.
Welcome to the Friday Focus podcast for the 28th of November, 2025. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, chair of the Munk Debates, joined in studio by Janice Stein, my co-host and the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs. Great to see you, Janice.
Good to be here, Rudyard.
We have a big debate coming up. It is a matter of days. December 3rd, we are gathering in Toronto to debate the motion, be it resolved, it is in Israel's national interest to move forward with a two-state solution. Four prominent Israelis up on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, past prime ministers, multiple justice ministers, ambassadors to the United States and elsewhere. Janice, what are you hoping this debate does? This has been such a logjam in Israel for so long now. I think everyone concedes that if there is going to be some kind of solution, some kind of rapprochement between the Palestinian people and Israelis and the state of Israel, it will require an evolution of the dialogue from where it is now. Yet many Israelis, because of October 7th, are more pessimistic, less enthused, frankly, outright opposed to the idea of a two-state solution. How did we get into this situation?
You know, it's astonishing, Rudyard, just to look at the numbers for 1 minute. You're absolutely right. On the Israeli side, support for a two-state solution is the lowest it's been, but so is it among Palestinians. When you poll Palestinians in the West Bank, it's very low. Where is it highest? Not surprisingly, in Gaza, but even that, it's a minority. So we find ourselves in a situation in which there's literally the lowest support, both among Palestinians and Israelis. And you're absolutely right that without recognition of the political rights of Palestinians, there's no solution to this. They're just interludes between wars. But wars radicalize. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're seeing. This was a brutal war. And I think that one thing that sometimes people who don't visit the region miss is there's trauma on the Israeli side as well as on the Palestinian side. Right. And when that happens, the space for considering political solution just narrows.
Yeah.
So I hope this resonates back.
Yes, exactly.
That's what you hope. But we are a long way, sadly.
Yeah. No, I think the reason we're doing this debate is we are a long way, but the debate, the conversation has to start somewhere. And if it has to start in Toronto, Canada, at the Munk Debates, well, then that is us putting our platform into service of, an important discussion that affects not just Israel and the people of Palestine, but the rest of the world, regional security, all the issues that we talk about here on Friday Focus. So if you are listening to this podcast or watching on the YouTube channel and you are a Munk donor, you have exclusive ticketing privileges to this debate. You can access tickets that have been set aside exclusively for Munk donors. So head over to our website, www.munkdebates.com. Look for the information about how you can order tickets via the box office. All the links and information is provided there. And more importantly, go through your emails, because we've been emailing you, Munk donors, for the last couple of weeks with our ticketing information. And that's probably the best place to start in terms of securing your ticket to this debate. And Janice, the pledge remains that we're going to allow Munk donors who have a younger person in their life, 25 years of age or less, to bring that person to the debate as their guests, because we really think it's important to get young people out, being part of debate in the public square. And I know you at the Munk School, that's a big part of what you do every day.
It is, and it's important to do, Rudyard, because it's not getting easier, it's getting harder to have these kinds of debates. So really important to do.
Yeah, the secret here at the Munk Debates, or maybe it's not a secret, is that over the 15 years of doing this series, it's literally becoming harder and harder to do this series. It's harder to get people to debate each other. Often, Ricky Gurwitz, our managing director, and myself run into problems where the environment is so polarized, it's so charged that people feel that they can't appear on stage with someone else because their tribe will literally tear them down on Twitter and
that
elsewhere.
happens.
Yeah.
And that's not an imaginary fear. There are so many ways, really social media and even personal emails that are really ugly, that make public debate very challenging. But if we can't do it, Rudyard, we don't have a democracy.
You're right. It's core to our democracy. And I guess that's the other thing that we've noticed here over the last few years, really since October the 7th, is that when the Munk Debate does debates that touch on Israel or issues like anti-Semitism, wow, does this get more complicated for us, because suddenly the protest culture that's out there that has legitimate elements, but also, frankly, some illegitimate elements where people are increasingly using violence and intimidation to pursue their arguments in the public square, all that comes back at the Munk Debates in terms of higher security costs, in terms of trying to figure out how do we have safe, secure, civil, substantive debates in a climate, literally, where people want to kind of start throwing things at each other. We've seen some very disappointing, I think, recent spectacles here in Toronto of again, violence around these issues that we're going to be debating on December 3rd. So needless to say, we've taken all the steps, all the precautions to ensure for a safe, secure debate, but wow, I'm starting to get some gray hairs, Janice, from this job. And maybe this spring we should do an easy topic like cats versus dogs. Does that sound like a good one?
I'm all in for that now, Roger.
The spring debate will be it resolved. Cat lovers are 10x smarter than your local dog lover.
Let me just ask you, where do you come down on that one? I'm really clear.
Really? I started with dogs as a kid, and I had multiple dogs, and I love them. But as an adult, I've had a cat, and I've come to appreciate cats. I appreciate the degree to which they aren't slavish in their devotion. They are prickly, they are independent. They are, in fact, less domesticated. Dogs have been domesticated for, I think, over 10,000 years. Cats' domestication is relatively recent, and I think that shows it. I kind of like the independent streak of cats.
I am an all-dog person.
Oh, here we go.
All dog.
Okay, you and I on stage, June 3rd, 2026. Cats versus dogs, and less gray hairs on my and Ricky Gurwitz's head as we take on our second debate related to Israel. Let's jump into the show, though, now, because two topics I want to discuss on this week's program. One, this utterly farcical peace talk that has kicked off yet again between the White House, Putin, Trump, Zelensky. It is just a dog's breakfast, to pick up on our earlier conversation. And then let's talk briefly, you find some time just talk about pipelines, because we had a big pipeline announcement in Canada this week. Janice, but to talk about the Ukraine issue first, this was so predictable, wasn't it? And it goes back to something that you've said time and time again. This White House does no preparation. There is no use of the vast bureaucracy and skill of the State Department, the intelligence agencies, all of it, in a sense, the professional tools of statecraft that actually matter. And instead, we just have a real estate developer from, New York who made his fortune in strip malls, heading off to Moscow to write up 28-point plans that the president seems to endorse.
Just to take a moment, we often make fun of diplomats and the diplomatic culture, and I could go on at length about all the rituals that diplomats engage in. But to be serious, they really matter. They bring a sense of professionalism. This was off the side of Steve Witkoff's desk, if he has.
And Jared Kushner.
And the president says go, and they go, and I don't think that he knew everything that was in that document, but it was what it then became was an invitation to the dance, and the Europeans rushed from the G20 to
This is like
Geneva.
the third or fourth time they've had to do this.
We've seen this, and now we're back at something that I can tell you, but Vladimir Putin will not accept. All right.
Well, he said as much today
Yes,
that
he did.
territorial concessions are prima facie table stakes, and
Yeah.
Zelensky has said no territorial concessions.
Well, there we are. So after this whole week of panic
Yeah.
and round-the-clock meetings, we're not really any further down the road.
No.
There was one piece of information that struck me as I was reading, this torrential outpouring because it obsessed the Europeans who want to, think they should be at the center of this and are absolutely miffed that Trump is doing this over their heads. But Dan Driscoll, who's the Secretary of the Army, who was in the Army but left to be an investor. He ran an investment fund of some kind.
Very close to J.D. Vance.
Very close to J.D. Vance, 39, so relatively speaking young to be Secretary of the Army, said something that made me sit up. He told the Europeans that Moscow is stockpiling long-range weapons. Moscow really hasn't done that since the Ukraine war started because they get them, they fire them, they get them, they fire them. But the message really was, look, we're seeing that they're increasingly stockpiling the missiles that have the longest range. And he said to the Europeans that they will use those against Ukraine. So that is the message, frankly, that the Trump administration is now sending to everyone. Ukraine cannot win this war. People dispute that. That is a disputable assertion. Let me just make it clear. But that's where the United States, that's where this government is. Ukraine cannot win. Settle now, because a year from now, it'll be worse for you.
Yeah, so let's take that up seriously. I think we all agree that what's happened last week again was utterly shambolic and not really worthy of serious consideration. But I think what is worthy of serious debate is, despite how punishing these terms are for Ukraine, and maybe some of the terms could come off, but maybe something like territorial concessions has to remain in order to satisfy the Russians. Do we acknowledge that what you just said, that it will only get worse? We're heading into winter. The Russians have been systematically degrading the Ukrainian power grid, natural gas supplies, generators, etc. And yes, Europe can insist that they will stand with Ukraine, provide Ukraine with weapons and arms. But the reality is that it's the Ukrainians who are dying. It's the Ukrainians who are facing the winter. And Putin shows no sign of backing down. So what is your advice? Do you take a deal that is a modification of this 28-point plan now that would probably lead to Zelensky's
the end of his political career.
End of his political career, and possibly, people worry, real instability inside Ukraine, because there are elements of the army, the Azov battalions in particular, who are very pro-nationalist and are completely against any kind of settlement or agreement with the Russians. You court the risk of all kinds of instability and the potential for vassaldom for Ukraine going forward. So not only do you lose the peace in the moment with whatever plan is struck, but you lose the next 5 years, the next 10 years to really effectively rebuild your country. Boy, Janice, that is a high price to ask, isn't it?
Yeah. And, you've outlined how dire the choice is for Ukraine. I don't want to get into the wonky detail here, but on some points, Rudyard, the gaps are not as big. For instance, limiting the size of Ukraine's army. This 28-piece plan said 600,000. Zelensky agreed to 800,000. Now that's 25%. It's not nothing, but you can see what this last round has done. there's been some effort to close the distance on some of the issues that are strictly Russia-Ukraine. Everything else was taken off the table. So what's the really big stumbling block at this point? There's one on the Russian side and there's one on the Ukrainian side. On the Ukrainian side, Russia's demand that they cede land that they have not been able to conquer.
Right.
And if you look at and that's why I said it's disputable that Ukraine has lost this war. What the Russian army has conquered in a year is so small in comparison to conquering the rest of the Donbass at such a high price. This is no cakewalk for Russia. Let's
they're
just
saying
understand.
possibly 1,000 casualties,
Yes.
Russian casualties per square mile.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a cemetery.
That's utterly astonishing, frankly, if we stop over that number, and that number doesn't get as much attention as it should. So that's point number one. The second thing, and here's where I think Putin's absolute unwillingness to compromise, denazification of Ukraine. What does that mean? Right? That was an invented.
Well, immediate elections are what the Russians are demanding, which I'm sure would result in maximum Russian pressure to elect a pro-Kremlin.
Yeah, who votes? Do people in occupied Ukraine, such as there are, because the place is largely denuded, frankly, there are not many. Who votes? Do people in occupied Ukraine vote? There are internal politics, as you just said, in Ukraine. There are opposition parties who want elections even in the middle of a war. There are factions within the military. The risk here toward destabilization of Ukraine, that's what would enable Russia to achieve its objectives far more easily than continuing to fight the war, right? Yeah. And that's why this is so hard to solve. Now, I don't think we're going to we will see an end to the fighting.
Right. We're going to go through a tough winter.
Yeah.
So before we get to the next topic, pipelines exclusively for our donors on the back half of the show, let's just go a little bit higher up, because something else happened this week that in some ways I think is not unconnected with this, again, shambolic, ridiculous 28-point plan. Japan has stationed or indicated their intention to station missiles on a forward island in proximity to Taiwan, ostensibly in kind of defense of Taiwan as an ally. This is under a new conservative prime minister, a slightly kind of MAGA-lite prime minister that has kind of shocked the Japanese.
Maggie Thatcher-like.
Well, we hope.
Right.
Maggie Thatcher was a long time ago. I think she was not MAGA, and I think these folks are a little more MAGA. But this has deeply angered the Chinese, who have instituted tourism and other kind of embargoes and bans on Japan and are starting to threaten Japan. Xi called Trump, in a sense, to have Trump lobby the new Japanese prime minister, I assume, to either withdraw these weapons or make concessions to China. I thought that was the kind of sleeper story of the week, because it suggests an inclination on Trump's part, not simply to align with Putin, but to align with Xi, to align with autocrats vis-a-vis their interests specifically related to the reconquest or intimidation of peoples and places that these autocrats see as lost territory, lost fragments of the homeland. And I thought to myself, wow, if the United States is not only abandoning Ukraine and Europe, but abandoning Taiwan and Japan in favor of another autocratic leader, we are truly not in Kansas anymore.
You know, I read the story from a slightly different perspective, because he hasn't actually done it yet, Trump. To the best of our knowledge, he could have had a private conversation with the Prime Minister of Japan. I read it slightly differently. She's a new Prime Minister, and literally, I think 1 week into it, Rudyard, she says any threat to Taiwan would be an existential risk to Japan. No Japanese prime ministers said anything like that. Talk about no ambiguity. That really means we will go to war if you attempt to occupy Taiwan. Well, all hell breaks loose, as you said, and just to think about some of the lighter moments for a moment. In Taiwan, they're now eating sushi, which they haven't done for a decade, and you see the sands moving. Interesting to me that Xi Jinping would feel vulnerable enough that he would call Donald Trump to ask for help. That call was motivated by his anger and his concern.
Is it vulnerability, or is it like Putin, an understanding that there's a useful idiot in the White House who has a predilection for chumming up to autocrats like Putin and Xi? So it's like, yeah, why not call Donald Trump? He's coming to visit with me. He likes doing me favors. He's impressed about how powerful I am. It's just another card to play in Putin and Xi's arsenal to pursue their expansionist claims in Ukraine or now in Taiwan.
You know, probably both. But it is interesting. Instead of just coming out in the forceful way that Xi Jinping does with the kind of language the Chinese, the original response from China is, I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like her filthy hands.
Yeah.
You got over the top diplomatic response. What does he need Donald Trump for? What does he need him for? But he must have thought he's useful, even if he's a useful idiot, right? And it's rare, it's very rare, Rudyard, that Xi Jinping reaches out they usually reach out to make their position clear and make sure there's no misunderstanding. But to actually hint that U.S. intervention with Japan would be helpful, that's not usual for the Chinese.
I think it's brilliant, though, for the Chinese, because what it does is it tests one of the core parts of the rapprochement currently between the United States and China, which was Trump unofficially saying, okay, we're hands off on Taiwan. We're not going to speak like Nancy Pelosi did about the importance of Taiwanese independence. We're back to a one China policy, effectively. And maybe even worse, like Ukraine, we're actually kind of a bit indifferent at the political level about the fate and future of Taiwan in terms of unification with China. So I think Xi gets to test a little bit on that. And then second, he gets to scare the pants off the Japanese, who basically think, oh, our multi-decade ally, our superpower, who supposedly guarantees our security, is now having calls with the premier of China about our position vis-a-vis the Chinese, and we're not part of those calls.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to wait to see if Donald Trump does anything, and who knows if we'll know. But I don't
think he can resist, can he, Janice? He loves, it's all about this kind of Peace Prize obsession. He'll start talking about how he averted another war between China and Japan and why he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize.
There's no story he can't tell. But if you look at Japanese public opinion, really, really interesting. And again, you're right that there's something going on with younger voters. Japanese under 40 are fully in support of her.
Yeah.
They're proud of her. They are not hung up on, their constitution, which came out of World War II, which requires Japan to stand down and away from the use of military force. The support for her is over the top inside Japan. She's not going to back down. Right?
No, I don't think
this
so.
Is, her party was in deep political trouble. All of a sudden, she has a base now among younger people. She won't back down.
Yeah, my final comment, though, is I think Japan needs to be careful. The Chinese have long memories. Japan occupied China. The rape of Nanking was one of the great atrocities committed in the 20th century. China has long and painful memories about Japanese imperialism and Japanese military aggression. I think layer that on top of a kind of nationalist China at this moment, a China at home that's in a in a lot of trouble economically, and you create the conditions possibly for a miscalculation
for sure.
Between these two powers.
Well, you never know. Do you think if there's possible miscalculation that Donald Trump might be instrumental here as a peacemaker?
I'd say more likely in terms of an accelerant, something that makes those miscalculations more likely, not less.
Spraying gasoline,
yes,
right?
Exactly, a flamethrower. Let's say goodbye to our complimentary listeners of yours. We're going to join our Munk donors for a short chat on the other side, just about pipelines, to get our quick reflections on the big domestic story this week. So goodbye to our complimentary listeners and viewers. And in a moment, hello to our Munk donors.